Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to Bad at Keeping Secrets. I'm Carissa, and I feel so unbelievably lucky to have Florence Williams here today. She's a science journalist, a memoirist. She has 3 books, and she's all around, I would say, a conceptual artist. I can't say that I don't have a certain amount of bias in saying that. I think most of my graduate school work and my work thereafter has been dealing with our understanding of heartbreak and relationships and sort of the spectrum of emotion. And I feel like Heartbreak, Florence's new book, A Personal and Scientific Journey, does just that. She melds her own heartbreak and her own story with sort of cutting edge research on how pain and emotional pain and trauma affect the body. Kind of, I would say, in your own search of sort of coping with what was going on and the sort of disruption of your identity. Can you talk a little bit, Florence, about kind of what events happened in your life to kind of spur this research?
Sure, and thank you for having me for this conversation, and thanks for saying I'm a conceptual artist. That's like, I feel like that's such a compliment. So often my own life is what drives my curiosity to the topics that I write about. And I tend to, write everything a little bit in the first person, but it's usually a very subtle first person. But when I got heartbroken, it became a much bigger first person. And so the book really does kind of veer into memoir because it is by necessity an extremely personal kind of topic that requires bearing one's emotions and I think being really vulnerable on the page, which is kind of the whole point of getting through heartbreak, is kind of owning and inhabiting your vulnerability. So I met the man who would become my husband when I was 18. It's my first day of college. And we were together for 32 years until he really fell in love with someone else. And that was really hard. It was really hard. I was dealing with, a sense of betrayal, a sense of abandonment, the loss of the life I knew, the loss of the future that I thought I had, and a lot to deal with in terms of like just my self-esteem and my identity and how I was going to survive, and a lot of fear.
I think, well, thank you for sharing. Obviously, I mean, this is a really hard potentially topic to talk about. I wanted to kind of ask you about when that sort of happened. You had done some research in the book about the sort of ways that our brains change, and sort of the symptoms around, or the correlations between having like a death, heartbreak in some ways being worse than a death, in terms of the brain chemicals or chemistry changing.
I don't really want to sort of order one as being worse
I shouldn't have
than
done
the
that.
other. I mean, I think grief it's such an idiosyncratic emotion. It's so different for everyone. And certainly there's a lot of fear of the unknown and fear of the future, and people who've lost a life partner as well. But with this kind of heartbreak, there's layered in on top of that the sense of abandonment and sense of the rejection. Someone chose someone else over you, or thinks they want someone else over you. And as humans, we're not very happy about being compared to other people, about changes in our status. We're hyper aware of our sort of standing in a group or in a couple. We're very, very hypersensitive, and our brains are designed that way because that's how we survive best, is if we are liked, if we are loved, if we can get along with other people. That's how we succeed. It's how our offspring thrive. We need other people. And so when we sort of feel like we've been kicked out, it's terrifying. And our bodies register that, our immune systems even register that as being a threat to our very survival.
You talk a little bit in the book about you were taking, I think, you were having blood draws throughout
Yeah.
the breakup in different durations. Can you talk a little bit about how the heartbreak actually affected your nervous system, immune system, and potentially genetic implications?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I often do in my sort of writing, is that I find ways to kind of experiment, on myself to tell the story. And when I had heard that lonely people, of which there are many, 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 um, we know, and we've known for a long time, that people who identify as lonely have a 26% increased risk of early death, that they're much more likely to develop chronic diseases, such as metabolic diseases, like diabetes, such as cardiovascular diseases, metastatic cancer, even Alzheimer's. And so um, I I was interested in why, like, why was that? Why does your immune system care if you're lonely? How does it know that you're lonely?
It's interesting
Um,
to apply care to this system that we feel like it doesn't care, but actually does. I think
yeah,
it's an appropriate
you
marker.
can't really hide things from your immune system. Like
It knows
somehow
all.
it knows everything. But why? Like, and so I worked with this immunogeneticist who's made it his life's work to find and identify the transcription factors, the actual different kinds of molecules that tell your immune system how to upregulate or downregulate certain types of immune cells, to fight different kinds of diseases or threats. And it turns out when we're feeling lonely, our bodies pump out a lot more inflammation. And that's because we're sort of gearing up in some ways for a wound, for battle, because our 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 bodies and our brains feel like we've been abandoned. So now we're on our own. Suddenly, oh, we need a lot more inflammation. That's going to help us. It's going to help us in the short term if we're alone, stumbling through the jungle. But it's not really going to help us if we're living through a pandemic when we need not to be fighting wounds, but to be fighting viruses. And if we're going to face these kinds of social pains for a long time, like potentially months and months and years and even decades for some people.
Can you talk about how, if you don't mind sharing, kind of you thought that you knew that there was going to be emotional pain, but could you talk a little bit about the specific ways that this heartbreak affected your body?
Yeah, so I did. I knew it was going to hurt emotionally. I didn't expect my body to start breaking down in the aftermath of heartbreak.
Seems like a
And
really inconvenient time
it's like,
for one's
please,
body to break down.
can I just have my health?
Yeah.
No, no, can't. So um, yeah, I mean, again, our nervous systems get really hyper sort of activated to prepare for threat. And so things like, sleeplessness, like you're hyper vigilant, you're looking over your shoulder, waiting to be jumped, by a predator. Um, so your digestion doesn't work well. You don't sleep well. I lost 20 pounds like right away that I did not want to lose. Um, and I was diagnosed with diabetes, adult onset type 1 diabetes, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
Usually that's diagnosed in children. And it was part of my autoimmune system, kind of responding probably to all this inflammation that my white blood cells were now putting out there.
Yeah. So I think that when I think about the sort of, not to overuse the word journey, um, for feeling better, what do you think about sort of the language around heartbreak that might need a little bit of altering? Or I guess what I'm asking is, since you've tried all these different ways to kind of move through it, um, time being an important one,
Mm.
what do you think, what parts of the way that we talk about language aren't helpful, or talk about heartbreak with language aren't
Yeah, that's
helpful?
a really interesting question. I mean, I found so many of the metaphors actually really apt. The pain metaphors, the broken heart. I mean, there actually is literally some heartbreak that people experience where their hearts stop pumping sometimes in the wake of this kind of grief. So the pain metaphors were very apt. I think what's a little more problematic, and this extends beyond heartbreak, is the way we talk about trauma as being, so devastating. Um, and I think we don't spend enough time talking about how, in some ways, trauma is normal. Like, we're supposed to feel deeply upset when something has gone wrong. We're supposed to feel unsafe. Our body's kind of protecting us by doing that. But on the other side of that trauma, very often there is growth.
I think you talked a little bit about this in the IG Live about kind of how heartbreak in some ways has made you a better human. Could you talk a little bit about what you've learned or how you've grown from this experience?
Yeah. I mean, I used to be someone, I think, who was really focused on my career, focused on my kids. Even though my marriage wasn't always so fulfilling and connected, after 32 years, I didn't pay a lot of attention to my heart and to ways in which maybe I was feeling like sort of hurt or sort of sad or not connected. I wasn't spending a lot of time with my emotions. It was kind of easier not to. And when you're so knocked over by something like this, you have no choice but to confront your emotions. Like, they are just going to clobber you. And the best thing you can do at that point is to sort of pay attention. Like, what are these emotions telling you? And when I surrendered to that, those deep kind of the deep pain and the deep suffering, I also weirdly and unexpectedly found myself being open to other emotions, like to love of my kids or love of my friends. Like, the being vulnerable made it possible for me to sort of relate and move through the world in a different way. That was weirdly fantastic and rewarding.
Can you talk a little bit,
Yeah.
sorry if I interrupted you, a little bit about how in some ways it cultivates or the ability to empathize with other humans and be compassionate
Yeah.
if you've experienced this.
Well, when you've experienced your own suffering, I think it's easier to see it in other people and to empathize with other people going through it.
The I wanted to talk two more things. I want you to talk a little bit about the role of finding awe and on beauty, because I feel like that is a theme throughout the book. But I also wanted to, if you could talk a little bit about the sort of extras on the audio version of the book that I think
Oh,
are really fascinating.
yeah. Thank you for asking about that. As someone who's done several podcasts and has also been interested in audio work, I taped all the interviews throughout the reporting for this book, including I kept an audio journal. I taped my therapist. I taped my best friends. I taped the sound of crows on the river, and the wind and the rain. And so I ended up with 200 audio files that we decided to actually layer in to the audiobook. So the audiobook is this kind of hybrid between a classic audiobook and almost like a podcast.
I think that this is again where I kind of feel like the conceptual artist comes in. Are you familiar with Sophie Cowell's work?
No, who's that?
She's a French conceptual artist who's done a lot of work on documenting her own heartbreak.
Oh, wow.
I think the piece that comes to mind was she decided that she was going to take a road trip with a man, and this is like in the 1970s, across the United States, and make him fall in love with her by the end of the trip and document the whole thing. It doesn't, I mean, I won't spoil it, but
How do you
anyway,
how do you spell her last name?
so Calle.
Okay.
She's represented France at the Venice Biennale several times, but there's so many different people working in this vein, but she came to mind. But I think like the idea that the immersive nature of having these like actual reality, the sounds, I almost feel like maybe I need to have whatever you were drinking at the same time while I'm listening to it and have this like full immersive experience, which I feel like is really important right now when everything is virtual.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's something about sound that creates a real intimacy with the listener or the reader. The emotions are so raw, in some places, and they're just easy to access.
Can you talk about how you actually I mean, this takes a lot of guts, Florence, to like interview your rebound.
Probably took more guts on his part.
It was pretty mutually gut involved, I guess. But how was that like going back through, kind of combing through your experience and connecting these people? Did you find that there was an alignment with how they experienced the events, with how you remember it?
No, I don't think that at all. I think, that's the thing about life, is that, we all are sort of governed by our own egos and our own perspectives. And as anyone who's written a memoir knows, or who has read a memoir written by a family member knows, there are definitely different experiences by different people, even of the same events. So
Yeah, it's crazy in my own life how we remember things so differently. And
and
now
everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own story to tell.
yeah, and they're all really exciting. Florence, do you have a secret at all? Did you think at all about that question that you'd like to share, even though this book is like the most intimate, vulnerable secret that anyone could ever share?
All of my secrets are laid bare in the book. I mean, I guess just to be even more intimate or more obvious, to take one thread a little bit further, I don't talk as much as I felt that sex was like a very healing kind of experience for me coming out of a long marriage. Like rediscovering that part of my identity was super profound. And I just hint at it in the book, but that could be a whole other conversation sometime.
Recently I was interviewing someone who talked about this data behind couples saying how many couples say that they're actually having sex and how much sex they're actually having through analyzing Google searches. And it turns out we like lie about it a lot, and
That's
that
really
no one's having sex. But I think like when I was in undergrad and when the last time I broke up, I've been in a long-term relationship for 12 years now. But I think one of the most soothing or like coping skills that really worked for me was getting back out there and was that distraction. And I think that your book is really validating, because I had never heard that was an okay strategy. It was always just like a shitty strategy that I did that like was careless with other people's emotions. But actually, I mean, like if you're just really honest about it and both people are consenting, I feel like it can be a really positive experience.
I think, it's tricky, right? Because you have to feel safe. I mean, that's part of the whole point of getting over or getting through, you're never going to get totally over, your griefs and your losses, but you need to come to a place of safety. And so if you can engage in sex in a way that feels really emotionally safe, it can be, for me, it was really healing.
I think the sort of cool thing to imagine is what it would feel like to be desired.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, everything about it just blew my mind wide open.
Well, Florence, for that secret. I think that's great. Can I ask you one more question? I'll make it really fast.
Yeah.
This is in regards to sort of my own interests. But when you're writing about other people, especially sort of reflecting on other people's actions and your ex, how do you sort of marry how you talk about being authentic with your experience and your story? Sorry to use the term marry.
Don't use that. Like PTSD.
Well, just I think a lot of my work, it's tricky because I know that my actions affect other people, and I don't want to harm them. But I also like, this is how I generate the content that I'm interested is the content from our lives. And do you have any sort of, how did you go about doing that? Or are there any sort
Yeah.
of, did you have to, how did your ex feel about this?
Well, I very early on let him read an early draft, and he made comments on it and requested some changes, and I accommodated those. I feel like I worked really hard actually to protect him because of my kids largely, and I feel good about that actually.
I think so. Recently, I did some writing on we had to terminate a pregnancy for medical reasons, and it was like a
Sorry.
really big,
Wow.
like there were some people in my family that were really upset that I had written about it, and it felt like it was really inappropriate. But for me, it reminds me of this sort of, I think Jericho Brown told me once that you can't limit your experience in pursuit of creativity and your understanding of it, because it's all we have. And I think that you do a really good job of being really sort of neutral and non-judgmental through intense pain.
Thank you. Thank you. I've heard that when I was getting my fine arts degree,
Sorry. It's funny. So I have an editor who always thinks it's funny how my mother calls during these everyone. And I don't know how to turn it off. Anyway, she's calling now. But you were telling about your arts degree.
Yeah, I mean, I had a teacher once who said, it's okay to write about other people, but you have to be fair.
Like that.
And if you don't tell your story, if you feel like you're being censored, that's also bad for your health. So self-expression, vulnerability, showing up, all of that stuff is kind of what we need in order to be healthy and to be happy too.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Florence, for making time to do this with me again, everyone. I will put in the email a link to get Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. Also, check out Florence's website. There will be links for the audio files that we were talking about that are really exciting and immersive. And I really appreciate this, Florence. It was a really like page turner. It was a novel. It was not a novel. It read like a novel, but it actually had like really honest, deep understanding of the pain and trauma that we go through when we go through heartbreak. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate it.